in some way to this project. There's very many of you, and it would take too long to introduce you all at this point. So as I said, the Tanzania Development Trust has been working in rural Tanzania for 41 years. Our largest project is a safe house for girls refusing female genital mutilation, which is in Mugumu, Serengeti, and there's a picture of it here. So the woman on the left is Roby. She's an FGM survivor herself. She nearly bled to death at age 13 after she was cut, and she started a safe house in Mugumu. And these are some of the girls there. Rachel, I don't know why I've got this yellow box in the middle. Can you see that as well?
I can't get it now, I'm sorry.
Oh, don't worry, it's fine if nobody else can see it. So Tanzania Development Trust works in rural Tanzania in villages that are very, very poorly mapped. So villages like the one where we funded a locally produced water pump in Zeze in Kigoma, and many officials in these areas don't have maps. It's very difficult to navigate and to plan. Myself, I've spent many hours getting completely lost, driving through rivers in the rain because nobody actually knew where the school that we were trying to visit was. So this project is to map onto OpenStreetMap, so it's accessible to everybody online, on phones, and also to generate printed maps. So the village that we saw yesterday in the previous picture, Zeze, it's a village of 8,200 people, but this is what the map looked like in 2015, completely blank in Google Maps and blank on OpenStreetMap. But this is what it looks like now. So this is a combination of recruiting remote mappers that trace the roads and the buildings, particularly from, this was task 1069, set up by Pete Masters, who many of you know, but also local mappers on the ground that add points of interest, buildings, churches, schools, and so on, using a free smartphone app, MapsMe. So, as I said, our largest project is the Safe House in Serengeti. This is Roby. She goes out to do outreach work in the surrounding areas, the surrounding villages, but her work was very much hampered by the fact that there were no maps of the area. So she might get a message saying that there is girls who've tried to escape cutting in a particular village, but she doesn't actually know where that village is because she didn't have a map. So this project was started initially to map those villages to help protect girls from FGM. So as I said, we're using MapsMe. So the MapsMe can add points directly into OpenStreetMap. And the categories in MapsMe aren't really that suitable for rural Africa. You don't get many ATMs in the villages where we work because they're 40 kilometers from mains electricity, for example. So we're working with Ilya from MapsMe to produce a cut down version that will be in English and Swahili, and that should be ready next week. So we had discussions around the categories that would be most useful to keep, and the idea is that they will be in English and Swahili. And so as we traveled around rural Tanzania promoting this project, telling people about MapsMe, we set up competitions and leaderboards to try and introduce an element of gamification in it, which was very successful. And we set up WhatsApp groups for the competition to share, current progress, for people to ask questions, etc., which had a big effect on motivation. And we set up a Facebook group. So, for example, from the task I mentioned earlier, that they identified these grey areas as villages, but those satellite mappers obviously did not know what the names of those villages were. So linking with local people on the ground, we put pictures like this on Facebook so that people could actually say, oh, the village to the west of Rosetta is called whatever. And that was really successful too. So the satellite mapping is via the HOT tasking manager. So this was our first task. Mugumu, where the safe house is in the center of that area. So I think probably everybody here knows about how the tasking manager works. It basically takes an area and divides it into a grid, and remote mappers choose one of a square to map. The grey squares means they're not mapped, the orange squares means somebody has mapped them, and the green squares means that somebody has also validated them, a more experienced mapper. So this one now is 99% mapped, thank you to Sophie, mostly. Sorry, and 91% validated. So how this works is that when you choose a square to map, you see a satellite image and you trace the roads and buildings. And recently we've had access to digital globe imagery, which has made this much, much easier to do, particularly in Simu. So we started off in, we had a big launch for Crowd2Map just over a year ago, and we started with a triple mapping party. This was in Dar es Salaam. This was at the Safe House, and we also did mapping in London and Vilnius. Crowd2Map was set up by myself and Egle from Vilnius. We also recruited a large number of UN online volunteers. We're now up to around 1,500, and one of the things we did at the beginning was added data about school locations. So the data was available on Open Government Data. So we set up some instructions in a Google Doc and basically set up a sheet with all the school location data, and the volunteers added to the sheet when they'd added that information into OpenStreetMap and any problems that they'd come across. We did this for rural Tanzania, not Dar and not Arusha, because we felt that those areas were relatively well mapped already. So as we have these large number of volunteers, we've tried very hard to build up a sense of community so that people can share ideas and feel and learn from each other. So we've got a Slack channel here, which has now got around 170 people. So if you're interested in getting involved with that, please let me know and I'll send you an invite. And we also send regular emails to the volunteers telling them about the progress and telling them about events and talks and tips, etc. So doing this mapping has helped people like Roby to reach more girls in Mara. She's found out about villages that she didn't know about. She's managed to reach villages the best way, particularly in the rainy season. That's a big issue, and work out how much fuel she needs. In the cutting season, which is in December, girls escape from their families, and they get messages to come and rescue them from the safe house. What has happened previously is girls have escaped, but the car has got lost or run out of petrol, and then the girls have been recaptured and cut. And this is literally a matter of life and death. So this is a real example of how maps can save lives. And I'd like to just show this short video, which is from Al Jazeera about this project.
Nilikuja hapa maana nilikimbia ukeketaji. Baba alikuwa ananilazimisha kukeketwa. Ananiambia kwamba nisiende shuleni ili nikae swali ikifika nikeketwe nimpatie ng'ombe yeye ni maskini.
During the season of cutting, girls are now, for those who have educated, they are running. They are escaping FGM and they run to be protected to the safe house here. We can't work direct and get there to the village and save them because we don't know which road is short, which road can we use even to go to reach those villages. So mapping villages is helping us to identify some of the villages which have girls who are at risk.
One girl who just walked inside the house at around Yamoko, and she was to be cut on that particular day during night. Nobody knows where the girl stayed, but because we knew it's in Yamoko, we used our map to go to Yamoko. We succeeded to go up to the house and rescued the girl.
So as I said, we've now recruited over 1,500 online volunteers and now over 200 local mappers, and we've mapped a really large area, added over 175 villages and over 1.1 million buildings, and we've added many schools and clinics from the open government data, and that's showing the statistics again. So having better maps has helped prevent, we estimate, over 2,000 girls from being cut. Still over 1,000 girls were cut in Mara, a big reduction from the previous year, and only 4 girls died, down from 12 in the previous year. And if a girl dies after FGM, basically her body is thrown into the bush and you're never allowed to talk about her again. So what we've been doing also is training, trying to get everybody that we meet involved in this initiative to try and map rural Tanzania. So last weekend we mapped, trained 50 Peace Corps volunteers via Skype. See some of them. So up until that point, all of the things that I've talked about so far have been done entirely by volunteers on zero budget. Last month, we were very, very pleased to be awarded a grant of $5,000 from the HOT Microgrants, and the majority of this will be used to buy smartphones, which will be used to train village-level community change agents in 4 areas of Tanzania. I'm very glad that Ezekiel from MapSwipe is on the call, and he will be able to answer any more questions about that as well at the end, because he's one of the trainers. So this will be used to generate village and ward level maps and data, particularly around access to water, health facilities, land rights, etc. And we're just at the beginning of this process, so any advice will be most appreciated, and thank you to people who have already helped with this planning. So we've got a dashboard which shows the areas that we're going to start the community mapping in. So those are mapped in red, the wards that we're going to do this in first. And the orange areas show that the HOT tasks that we've completed so far. We've also started using MapSwipe, which I'll talk about briefly. And the orange dots in the top are the areas where FGM, we have data on FGM incidents from the last cutting season. So MapSwipe, many of you probably know, is an app that shows people satellite images, and they can be asked to identify the areas that have roads and or buildings. We've done it only for buildings. So the idea of this is it greatly speeds up the mapping process. So people basically tap the areas that have buildings. This is validated, I think, with 4 different users, and then you use that to generate the task for the tasking manager. But it only uses the areas where there are buildings, to save people spending a long time looking through tiles that basically have nothing on them. And so we've been using this for some of the tasks in Maswa. It does rely on having good Bing imagery available though. So our plan that we sent to HOT was that we would use Maps.me to map places such as the village office, school, dispensary clinic, water point, M-Pesa for transferring money, legal offices, churches, etc. In the villages where we're doing the community mapping. Yesterday I had a very good Skype call with Ezekiel in Maswa, because he was doing training with legal officers, and we had discussed the project via Skype, and they discussed that they're very interested in this, and they wanted to collect some additional data about the places in the villages where there's child labour, girls' hostels linked to the school, and also they were very interested in the number of children each village with disabilities, if they got support, whether they were in school, and some issues around the school infrastructure. So we're still debating the best way of collecting this data. So if anybody here has had any experience of that or any insight, then I would very much like to hear from them. Also, we originally started by asking at the mappers on the HOT tasks to map buildings, residential areas and roads. We've since had some discussions with people in the HOT community that it's not worthwhile asking people to map the residential areas. It would be better to do that via some automated tasks. So you look at the building density and make some algorithm about, okay, if it's above a particular level, then this is a village. So I've been talking to Björn at Cambridge University, who's also on the call, I believe, and he's very keen to work with somebody to do some coding for that to happen automatically. Also, we're aware of there are a lot of really high quality data sets available. We've been talking to Chris Grundy at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, who has data, for instance, and we would very much like to import that into OpenStreetMap if possible. I know that there are big issues around imports. We've had a lot of talks already about, for example, the open government data for water points and the license issues around that. But if there's anybody there on the call or watching the recording later who's able to help with that, that would be amazing. Also, for the community mapping, we'll be giving, loaning fairly low cost Android phones to the community mappers. They'll have them for a month and they'll go around mapping their village, and then they'll bring the phones back and we'll upload them. We wanted to work out a way to track the GPS accuracy when they're doing that. So if anyone's had any experience or got any ideas of that, please get in touch with Björn. And we're going to write up a research paper about the mapping, the community mapping, and obviously this will be shared fully with the HOT community and OSM community. So, but if you're interested in getting involved, or if you know anybody with, particularly with coding skills, that would be fantastic. Also, we're really delighted that Egle is going to be presenting about our work at the State of the Map in Japan in August. And this will be about the impact of mapping on fighting FGM. Okay, so if you're interested in more information in that, please contact Egle, and or if you're interested in getting involved in that project. Tanzania Development Trust funds small scale water projects often. One of the issues that we have is knowing where are the really greatest sources of need. I mean, there is a huge need for water across rural Tanzania anyway. So one of the things that we want to do is to overlay population density and water point locations to assess the relative needs of applications. So this is using data from MapSwipe initially. And we're also really delighted that we're participating in the Summer of Maps, and Janting is going to be joining us for a month from June. So these are some of the projects that she's been involved in previously about crime incidents in Chicago, and health food accessibility in Philadelphia, and also historic buildings demolition. So she's going to be looking with Egle at the impact of mapping on FGM. So if anyone has any advice around that project, I'm sure she'd greatly appreciate it. So how you can help. So far, apart from the HOT budget, which is of $5,000, which is, although to us it's a lot of money, we actually need to do a lot with that. So if anybody has any ideas about access to smartphones, the villages where we work, generally people do not have a smartphone. So that's really the limiting factor. So up to this point, we've been relying on people using their own smartphones. With the community mapping initiative, we are able to to provide some phones, but there's only 12 per area. So if anyone has any contacts there, we will make very good use of them. Similarly, if anyone's got any ideas about funding sources, even for really small grants. I mentioned some of the things about coding, and we would really, really welcome any comments, suggestions, or questions now or going forward. So there's my contact details, our website and our Twitter. Thank you for listening, and I hope there's some questions. Thank you.
Janet. Yeah.
All right, also at this point, you have the option to unmute yourself if there are questions. And so I'll just leave that if anybody has any. If you'd prefer to, you can pop the question into the chat window, or raise your hand so that we can go through them.
This is Geoffrey here, Kampala. I do have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Yeah, so Janet, the question from me is, what's the reception of the community where you work on the activists and your volunteers? How does the community in a threat, because they're trying to, which is happening, but which is practiced again by the community. So what's the reception of the community? to the
attitude of the community.
people who are volunteering on.
Okay, well, we've had really, really positive responses. So Tanzania Development Trust has local representatives in all of the areas where they work. So, and they are actually the trainers in the community mapping project. So these are people like Ezekiel, who's on this call, and Roby herself, who are very embedded in the local community and have really excellent connections to district officials and so on. So because of that, the attitude has been very, very positive. I think that having really good local connections is vital. I don't know if Ezekiel wants to say anything.
Yeah, yes, Janet.
Okay, hi.
Yeah, just to add to what you have said. Of course, if you can remember, for example, yesterday I had a Skype call with Janet with the leaders of paralegals organizations from 5 districts of the Simiyu region. Of course, I didn't tell them about the mapping project. So I welcomed you, Janet, and you explained it to them. From there, I think you can remember, they took the idea very positive. And of course, they came out with so many suggestions as you have presented. With that, to me, what I can say is the community perception to the project is very positive. And of course, they are very happy with the project. And most of them, for example, yesterday, we had 25, and the number of phone is 12 allocated for MapSwipe. You see, then, because those leaders were from other districts of the region, they even asked you, Janet, please, we want that project in our localities. So with that, I can say that is the evidence to show how the community is positively accepting the project. And of course, it is very useful because we have so many challenges in our community. And with the mapping project, we'll be able to connect those areas to many stakeholders and make the areas more accessible by many people.
Thank you, Ezekiel. That was great.
Yeah.
I think we had a question there from Rupert, and then I'll get to you, Trudy, and you as well, Annette. Rupert asked to do all the coordination of the mappers on the ground, and how do you check that the mappers are committed?
Well, I mean, these are volunteer mappers. Nobody's being paid, so and they're using their own phones. So really, it's. I mean, up until this point, I mean, apart from that, I'm not talking about the community mappers who will have the phones for a month. Up until this point, it's just been people that we've met, that we've persuaded. So really, it tends to be sometimes people, when they're if they're traveling around, they add a lot of points. Certainly, you know, then there's issues sometimes around validation. One of the other things that we want to do, because with Maps.me there is a delay in when the maps are updated, you are sometimes going to get duplicate points added. So we're working with Maps.me to work better ways to do that duplicate removal. But I think if you're talking about volunteer mappers using their own phones, you can't expect them necessarily to add so many points a day or so on.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
Trudy, do you have a question there? Trudy, did you have a question? Okay, maybe we can get back to Trudy there in a second. And then, oh, we can't hear you, Trudy, sorry. Okay, sorry, go ahead now, Trudy.
Hi, are you hearing me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
I was saying that my question is about the volunteers. That how do you choose these volunteers, and how committed are they? Do they usually go to the field to collect the data when they have gone maybe to visit the villages? Like, I'm not understanding like how these volunteers work and how committed are they?
Okay, so I guess there's two types of volunteer. Up until this point, we've just tried to recruit anybody that we meet to get involved in this project, so that they're just volunteers, or they might be the district development officer. And so we're trying to persuade people, when you visit villages, please map them. So that's quite ad hoc, and people do it when they travel, hopefully. But in the next stage, for the microgrant, then we are recruiting people, those community change agents, that will have the phone for a month. And this will be, so community change agents, or in Maswa's case, legal officers, you know, it's a designated role, and they have a particular roles to do, you know, in their village. So they will, as part of that role, they will be asked to map particular points. So, for example, the legal officers that Ezekiel mentioned, part of their role is to monitor child labour, whether disabled children are in school. So we're mapping those places is part of their role, we see, and they're actually keen to do that. Although they're not being paid to do this, it fits, because they can see that it fits into what they're trying to achieve in their village. They're keen to do so. But unfortunately, with this scheme, we don't have the budget to pay people or to give them airtime or anything like that. So we are relying on goodwill of people who want to try to improve the development of their village and their area, and to tap into existing programs.
Janet, in addition to that, in our case, in Maswa, for example, we have two categories of volunteers. Category one is the CCA, the community change agents. These are simply community health workers. They are already volunteers as community health workers. And one community health worker is serving about 5 villages. So he or she uses to visit those villages regularly. For example, for community sensitization in malaria, TB, family planning, HIV, AIDS, you know. So they used to visit those villages regularly. So when they go for community sensitization in health, then they can take points. Then coming to the paralegals, they are also volunteers, but they work in legal issues. They are giving legal aid and legal education to the community as volunteers, you know. So as CCAs, when they go for community sensitization, legal education, or providing legal aid, then they can put some points from those villages. So that is the way our volunteers are working. And of course, they are not paid. They are volunteers, but in that way. So it is not a special task. No, we just integrate mapping with what they are already doing. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think Annette, you had a question? Let me go through. You can unmute yourself, and then we'll get to the other questions that were in the chat window. Is there something from you, Annette? I thought I saw your hand raised.
I am calling from Uganda. I want to.
Oh.
Hello.
Yes, Janet. It's a little difficult. Can you type your question into the window? The hearing is not so good.
Okay, well, while we're waiting for Annette, I can see there's a question from Innocent. I'm going to ask Innocent to answer his own question about if he's got any advice about the best way to do the validate the data from MapsMe, because I think this is an area that we need to look at as we move forward with this community mapping project. So Innocent, have you got any guidance, or perhaps Jeffrey has as well?
That's what I wanted to ask, because when you outlined on which help you need, so my question was whether you need any kind of mapping help, that is from people who are not in Tanzania, but would like to help, maybe if you have mapping tasks up and you want online mapping volunteers, and that's the other way how people can help, like to validate the mapped data.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also includes MapsMe data, because it also goes into OpenStreetMap. So when someone is validating data in an area, you can as well do validation for the MapsMe data. Yeah, maybe I don't know if there is a way of identifying data specifically from MapsMe when we find it in OpenStreetMap. So if like the source is added on to the data point, the data that is from maps.me, then someone can easily do validation for those points.
Yes, thank you. I believe that is possible, but perhaps we can talk about this later.
Yes, can.
So there's a question from Caliste that I think ties in as well with Trudy's question. Caliste's question is, mapping with phones, how long do you take to teach them? And after mapping, are you taking the phones? And then Trudy asks, how many tools do you teach them?
Okay, well, the community mapping is starting next month. So the idea is that they will have probably a couple of hours or a half day training, and it will be predominantly in MapsMe, at least for the first instance. And then the volunteers will have the phone for a month. They'll go out and map the village where they're based, and then we'll get the phones back, and then we'll train the next 12 volunteers who will have the phone for a month. So they're just loaning the phone for a month. We'll definitely be training them on MapsMe. We may also set something up in ODK or OpenMapKit, depending on what the feeling is, the data that people want to collect. But we and might also ask them to take a photograph. But though it will be mostly on MapsMe. We're very keen to keep the training very, very simple, because the volunteers, often they're only primary school leavers. I mean, they haven't had a secondary education in all cases, and they have not used a smartphone before. So they're very new to this. So we want to make the thing very simple. But because it will be rolling on a monthly basis, we also will do a lot of evaluation after the first month, get feedback on the data, but also on the experience of the trainer and of the mappers. And so we will change it as we go along. So if we find that, you know, there are some issues of the training or of the mapping that didn't go as well as hoped, we will adjust it for the next time round. So it's hopefully an evolving program, and we're also hoping to write this up as a research project.
Wonderful, thank you, Janet. So Annette was able to put her question in, and I think this kind of speaks to one of my questions about replicability. Annette was wondering, how easy is it to mobilize well-wishers within a community?
I think it's absolutely vital that you've got somebody well respected on the ground, which is why having somebody like Ezekiel and Roby is absolutely vital. Otherwise, I think it would be impossible. I think if I rocked up in a random village and tried to persuade people, it wouldn't work anywhere near as well.
Great, thank you. And then Natalia had a question. Just looking for it there. So she asked if do all small land uses have their own names? For example, which consist of 3 or 4 houses, and do they have names for the streets as well?
I think Ezekiel's probably better to answer that question. I mean, I don't believe so. Right, or it isn't, maybe, if Ezekiel's not there. I think, okay, I believe not. Somebody else, or Jeffrey might have a better idea. Okay, maybe I'll get clarification on that and get back to you. But I believe not.
Okay,
the answer I can give, this is Geoffrey, from my experience is sometimes the places have like official names for roads or streets, and many times they don't. But usually, what we normally do is use the local name that the people know, because this is the community map, and so that's what the name that they know locally is. It's a community mapping. So asking people on the ground what name they call a street usually helps.
great. Thank you, Jeffrey. Eric Mukiza also has a question. He would like to know what help you can give someone who would wish to start a map time in a certain community.
Well, I'm very happy to talk directly to anybody who wants to try and replicate this model. I would say that actually having good local contacts, on the ground is really, really vital.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janet. Janet, could maybe you speak to, I guess one of my question is, what are some ongoing challenges maybe that you see in the next year? And I know you've spoken to some of them and asking for additional help on things, but if you could speak to them specifically, the specific challenges that you face either culturally or logistically or in any of the realms.
Okay, well, I mean, I think our major challenges are that Tanzania is a very big country, transport is difficult, connectivity is hard, trying to sort of oversee this project at a distance. I'm a volunteer from London, so I'm trying to oversee it via Skype and WhatsApp. Often it works really well, like it did yesterday with Ezekiel in Maswa talking to their legal officers. But quite often, you'll be in the middle of a conversation and there'll be a power cut, or people will lose connectivity. So those are big issues. I mean, we're trying to do a lot of mapping with very small resources. I think the issue of getting volunteers to one place to do some training is difficult if you don't have much of a budget for transport or refreshments. We would love to be able to give the volunteers with the phones, some data so that they could be uploading them as they go along, but the budget doesn't allow that. So, I mean, one of the issues probably will be when they bring the phone back after a month. In some cases, I guess you'll see all the data that you wanted, great, but in some cases there will be some reason why. And if we had data, then we would be able to pick those problems up much earlier and address them. But at the end of the month, it's effectively too late. Also, many people will have problems charging their phones because these are in remote villages without electricity. So I see most of the issues as logistical and financial.
Great, thank you. I think there was one more question there from Mishak Muganizi about how people are going to work with the phone. So maybe what kind of training, starting at the very basic level, that you're having to give some of these people who may be less used to a smartphone. And I guess my question to add on to that is, who will be providing all that training?
Okay, well, how this is going to work is people like Ezekiel, who's leading the training in Maswa, will be delivering a short training on MapsMe to, for example, the legal officers and the community change agents. And so we're in the process now. Once we've got the Swahili MapsMe version out, which should be next week, then we're in the process of writing training materials to go with that, which we will evaluate after a month and refine.
Wonderful, that's great. Bjorn, do you think you could speak briefly about some of the info that you're putting into the chat window in case anybody can't see that?
Yeah, sure. Can everybody hear me? Hope so. We've just set up a couple of forms for people to leave their email address if they want to join Slack. So that's private. It'll just be shared with Janet and me. And we'll join you up to the Crowd2Map Slack platform if you want to get involved and get stuck in and help out. And then I thought it's also really nice if we all kind of know who everybody else is and we can stay in touch. So there's a second link, which I'll repost both links in a minute. The second link is Connect to Others. And that just allows you to leave your LinkedIn and your Twitter, and then people can connect with each other and continue the conversations via social media. So I just repost those two links now.
Thank you, Bjorn.
And we will be sending out the recording of the presentation to everyone that was registered, and we can share those links as well. Sorry, so Nora there has a question. In terms of the research, if you could speak more, Janet, a bit about the research project, excuse me. How are you analyzing the effect of the mapping, for example, and how did you estimate the number of girls saved?
Okay, so there's a number of research projects. I mean, there's one specifically about FGM that Egle will be talking about in Japan. She will be working with Zhang on the Summer of Maps issue. In terms of the numbers, that was numbers obtained from the Safe House themselves about the number of girls cut and being cut in each village, refusing FGM and dying. So that was from data that was collected by the Safe House, which shows a marked reduction in over the previous cutting season. But we're also, with Bjorn, we're also going to do a research project about the impact of community mapping, which is the micro task that HOT is funding us for, which is really about working out the best practices, some of the issues around training community mappers on a very low budget, which is what we're doing. Bjorn, I don't know if you want to say anything else about that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to say that I do think the project is hugely innovative. I think you can do all of this by brute force if you have tens of thousands or millions of funding. So I think to do it like this in a very kind of community-based way is hugely innovative, and I think that needs to be shared with the wider research community. It needs to be shared within the NGO community. So we really want to understand this process. How does the training need to happen? What are the barriers to using the phones? What are the barriers that might emerge in other ways? And what are the enablers? How can you really make this happen in other places? What do you need to think of? You know, is power an issue? You know, so we're thinking about solar power lanterns that can also charge phones. How long are they going to last? Are they going to break down? You know, what's the best kind of cheapest techno phone that we can have that still has the required facilities? Is it important to have Maps.me in both Swahili and English? Actually, they're doing a really innovative thing where you have a kind of dual language version and things like that. So I think there's lots of questions. There's lots of other NGOs, whether it's in Tanzania or elsewhere, will benefit from. And so those are the sort of ideas that we're trying to capture with it.
Thank you.
All right, so we've only got a few minutes left, so if anyone else has any questions, feel free to take yourself off mute or to throw them in the chat window there.
I just have I just want to reach out to Annette Nabi, I think, who was trying to call in from Uganda. And I just want to say that we are having a conference, State of the Map Africa, 7. Janet is very high likely to be here to present her work on Crowd2Map. So that's another chance to catch her and learn more about her and her project.
Yes, sorry, Jeffrey. I should have mentioned that. Yes, I'm very much looking forward to State of the Map in Kampala on, I think, the 8th and 9th of July. So yes, I'm hoping to meet a lot more African mappers at that and talk more about this project.
Yes, definitely. We are looking forward to having you in Kampala. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, maybe you could share the link for State of the Map Africa in the chat window.
Yes, of course.
There's also been some questions about online trainings. Yeah, so Jeffrey put the State of the Map Africa link in the chat window for everyone who's interested to attend, support, learn more. And then there have been questions about online trainings. For anyone who would like to get started mapping, there's a lot of training videos and support for that at Learn OSM. Which I can put the link into the chat window for. So that's a great place to get started. And if you haven't already, download the MapSwipe app, which gives you a lot of opportunity to map both online and offline, which is great. If anyone's commuting, wants to get on a bus, train, or a car to just swipe through and tap areas for mappers to focus on. So unless anybody has any other questions, I think we'll thank Janet for her time. Any last chance? Feel free to unmute yourself. All right, wonderful. Well, thank you, Janet. Do you have any final additions?
Just to thank everybody for attending, and thank you particularly for for the contributions, particularly from Ezekiel. That was really great to hear a perspective of people actually on the ground in Tanzania. And thank you. Keep mapping.
Great final points. And if anyone has any questions, like I said, we'll be sharing the links that Bjorn mentioned about how to stay in touch and kind of keep this conversation going, as well as the recording of the webinar at the end of this for all people listed as attending, and for all registered rather.
Thank you.